The 2020 Pitt football season was unlike anything anyone would have predicted at the end of 2019. But as so many Pitt football seasons are, it ended in disappointment and the feeling of what if. We'll discuss that and more on this week's Hail to Pitt podcast.
What was your message about finishing it in these final 30 minutes?
Well, it happened in West Virginia where we knocked off number 2. It happened in South Carolina, and it's happening in Pittsburgh today. Our guys had a lot of guts tonight. We're just going to keep getting better. I mean, that's what it is.
One hell of a game that you will never, ever forget. We shocked the world!
Hail to Pitt.
Hail to Pitt. This is the week of December 26th, 2020. This is the Hail to Pitt podcast, and I am Hail to Pitter, Alan Tazinski.
I'm Vince.
And I'm Pam.
And while the season on the football field is over, and there's tons of speculation about coaching changes and players staying and going, and fans just trying to find some little modicum of optimism wherever they can find it, we can now officially put all of the attention necessary on the hardwood where it belongs this time of year. Conference schedules underway. A lot to be hyped about this week, so let's get into it. Vince, Pam, Merry Christmas to you both. It's one of the merriest weeks of the year, even though Pitt will not be going to a bowl game, and the season is now over.
Merry Christmas to you, Alan. It'll be exciting to have some time off here to celebrate the holidays and watch some Pitt basketball, as you said, really getting into it.
Yeah, took down Miami last week, Pam, and I stuck it in my in-laws' face. They watched about 4 minutes of the game, and they couldn't take much more, but I don't blame them. Miami was pretty banged up going into that game, so Pitt got away with one, maybe, facing a team that was limping into that contest.
Yeah, and they had some injuries during the game, Miami, so they were shorthanded and they had some injuries during the game. But hey, a win's a win, and it's a type of win that in years past this Panthers team can't seem to pull out at times. So it's good to see them. They not only are they win games like that they should win, but they look a lot better too. I mean, Champagne's a star. We'll get into it a little bit here.
Yes, we will. We're going to be talking hoops, but we also have our football season in review this week, and that's all coming up right here on the Hail to Pitt podcast at H2P Show on Twitter. If you want to follow us on social media, you could email us, hail2pittpodcast at gmail.com. And, of course, we appreciate all the feedback we get on social media or on Panther Lair, on Reddit. We love the love that you give us. We're giving you love by doing the show every week because we're doing it for Pitt fans and to talk Pitt football, basketball, sports with all the Panthers out there. This show is brought to you by Pretty Easy Podcasts. You could go to prettyeasypodcast.com today to get started on your new podcast that you've been thinking about starting in 2021. A lot of podcasts are going to be started up next year, Pam, and the place to get started is at prettyeasypodcast.com because there you can get a really affordable producer to help you get the thing off the ground and sounding great.
Yeah, absolutely. Is your New Year's resolution to start a podcast or put yourself out there? I mean, Pretty Easy Podcast is the best place to start. They're excellent to work with.
Also, if you're a business professional or maybe you're a government body and you're running some sort of office or a library and you need to do shows, you need content, you need to make people aware of maybe what trash men are doing all the time, and you want to start a show hosted by the trash men in your city, go to prettyeasypodcast.com. Podcasting done the right way and done in a very simple way and a fun way, making podcasting pretty easy, prettyeasypodcast.com. Football season review time, Vince. We have a Pitt Panther team that didn't contend for the ACC at all really this year. Lost some games they should have won. Had some I'd say a few high moments, highlights, moments of exultation. Very brief, though. I think it was mostly pain, agony, misery, and waiting for this moment that we're in right now, the season to be over, at least for me personally.
Yeah, it started off, very good, but then, went downhill rather quickly. Just, a couple, really tough losses there, NC State and Boston College in particular, by 2 combined points. And then this losing streak started, and they just couldn't get back on track. And for me, I was saying, coming this season, that this was a put up or shut up time, and that this was the best team Narduzzi had, and there were very high expectations, and we had to see an excellent season. There were reduced games here, but you were thinking you had to see like an 8-3 mark at least. And that didn't happen. And, so for me, this team just did not live up to the expectations. I know it was a very difficult task, but they didn't get it done for me in 2020.
Yeah. 2 games short of that mark you were hoping for, Vince. And the expectations, Pam, I thought were pretty high for the defense and for just some improvement in the offense. That's what I at least said at the beginning of the year, and a lot of it was said on this show at the beginning of the year. At the end of it, though, were the expectations met? Did you add asterisks onto the expectations as the COVID season went along, just thinking this is a throwaway year? What about it from your perspective regarding the expectations of the Pitt Football Panthers this year?
I think we have no idea behind the scenes what these players and coaches and staff all went through. However, I think the biggest thing with the expectations not being met was early on in the year, the offense just, it looked a little different in that Georgia Tech and then also the Virginia Tech game, but the offense just didn't look too different. And you saw glimpses when those young receivers Pickett was able to connect with those young receivers, and they were able to provide a little bit of a spark. But I think that was the most frustrating part, was the lack of offense. The defense was still good, and I think there are some good things, and we'll get into some of the highlights and players that have really stepped up. But I think the defense, they got steamrolled by Notre Dame and they got steamrolled by Clemson, but we can see that those are 2 of the best 4 teams in college football right now. And I think aren't losses you look at. You do look at the Boston College, and you look at the NC State loss, and you even look at the Louisville win. Louisville, going into that game, it was a big matchup, and Louisville definitely fell flat on their face this year, and so that win might not have even been as good. You had Syracuse, it was they won. That they were terrible this year, so even their wins weren't even as impressive as maybe they were coming into the expectations. But I think the expectations weren't met, but I do think in some regards we give them a little bit of a pass. They did have a tougher schedule, but it's definitely something that you still feel a little disappointed regardless of the unprecedented times.
As a program, Pitt this year, I think, really solidified, hey, this is a place to come learn how to play defensive football at a pro level and maybe make it to the NFL. If you're an offensive player, this is your final stop. This is your final resting place for your career. You're probably going to go nowhere. And also, Pitt went into the season with the expectations the defense would be awesome. They maybe took a step or 2 back, but nothing major. They delivered, I thought. I agree, Pam. The offense, I was hoping, especially on the offensive line, for some improvement. There was none. And the losses to Boston College and North Carolina State really stand out to me as huge letdowns that should not have happened. And I do have to give, at least as a staff and for how you normally judge a college football program, I give them a pass on that front. I'm not out for anybody's job because of the year it was, but I am if it weren't a COVID year, I would be probably calling for people to be fired on this show and pretty upset as a fan because it was kind of ridiculous watching that offense this year. But they do get a pass from me on that front. But at the same time, I mean, some of these losses I still have a terrible taste in my mouth from that North Carolina State loss, especially. I mean, that was a horribly refereed game, don't get me wrong. But this is a Pitt team that could have done better. So overall, they may have underachieved. But then again, like Pam said, we don't know what the hell they were facing really when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the stress of a 2020 season. You must not pass judgment on these young men in 2020, Vince. You must not. The coaches maybe, but still, it's hard to assess in a year like this year.
And that's what makes it tough. You know, a great coach in this town once said that there's a fine line between winning and losing. And, 1 point against Boston College, a missed extra point in overtime, a 1 point loss to NC State where you gave up multiple, third and fourth down conversions at the end of the game. Kenny Pickett, your do everything quarterback out for the game against Miami in a game that you were, even without him, you were still somewhat competitive in. You look at those, and if you win one more of those games, if you win two more of those games, I think we're all looking at this as a drastically different season and drastically different evaluation of success. But how many times have we said that? It seems like we're always saying like, oh, if they would have won this game here, they would have won this game here, that they could have had it, then, they would have had a much better season. And then you start stringing a couple of those seasons together in a row, and you start really building a really good program. It's just tough to look back at some of those games and think how close they were. And maybe it kind of shows that, the depth on the team just isn't there yet, or maybe the coaching in some ways needs to be adjusted. I do think that they did kind of get better throughout the year in some aspects, and it would have been interesting to see what it would have been like if it was the regular schedule in a regular year, what they would have went up against. But the bottom line is that, given that the schedule they had, while it was difficult, there were still a couple more winnable games that they played well enough to win in. They should have had, but they came out on the losing end, and that's what's so heartbreaking about it.
Pam, let me ask you, what was the highlight of the season then for you?
I've really enjoyed watching the Virginia Tech game. I think part of it was because they came out and they did exactly what they needed to do in all aspects of the game from start to finish. They put their foot down and they just went for it. That was a fun game to watch and kind of just see this team succeed. I know Virginia Tech wasn't as good this year, but going back and looking at some of their wins, I mean, the Louisville game, but I think if you want to take one highlight away, I think like Kenny Pickett's toughness is something that we can all hang our hats on a little bit there. I think that's his play in the Boston College game and kind of just toughing it out and putting his team in a great position to win. I think those are two of the big highlights. But as a game, I'd say Virginia Tech, a nice stress-free game there.
Oh, I got to go the Louisville game. Just because it was the best feast I had during a game, maybe my best social distancing experience hanging out with any people in 2020. Few and far between, not a lot to pick from, Vince, but that was a great time.
Yeah, I was going to say even that first game against Austin P. We had some great weather that day. We were all watching the game together outside, socially distanced, of course, and just had a blast. Watching the Panthers just destroy that team and then starting to think about how good we might be as far as the game goes. As far as the game, I think that was my highlight, even though, maybe not necessarily for the team, but I'd say, but as far as a moment of this season, I think it's Kenny Pickett announcing that he's coming back for next season, because I think that that's absolutely huge. We talked about it last week, how big it is, Alan. Kenny Pickett coming back for next season gives this team a real shot to do something and to make some noise and maybe make next season what this season was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. We talked about last week to have that leadership come back, but also the announcement itself, just a good feel-good moment to end the season on. Really like last week, lifting spirits. We said not as doom and gloom as you would think after a 6-5 season where we just literally said this is kind of a letdown year. They should have been better than this, but Kenny Pickett making that announcement. And also, here's some optimism for you. I mean, we've got corruption all over college football, and I'm enjoying every second of it. We've got sanctions in Florida, sanctions in Tennessee, and I feel like, Pam, Pitt's going to benefit from some of this going on. LSU, I mean, Pitt already stole a recruit from them. Things are happening. You might even want to say the highlight of the season might have been all the Pat signals going up, because Narduzzi did kill it on the recruiting front, at least when it comes to projections for these players coming into college football.
Yeah, you can make an argument with that. And recruiting in these tough times, not being able to get people on campus or going in person, maybe they were best to stand in communication virtually, maybe lots of Zooms with these recruits. But that is a good highlight. It's kind of funny that the highlights are building for the future. So hopefully that means good things on the horizon here.
It does, because I was going to say, Vince, because going into this year, you felt like, well, there's a lot of talent that's going to be leaving from this team, so they got to get it while it's hot. But actually, there's more optimism than I could have thought at the end of the year than going into the year.
Yeah, I think you look at you look at what's coming back. You look at you're losing like your two best defensive players, Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver. But you look at what's still coming back on that defensive line, you got to feel really good about it. You think that offensively, you're going to have a new quarterback that you're going to have to replace. Well, and you got Jimmy Morrissey and Hargrove moving on the offensive line. And it's like, well, you saw at the end of the year some guys filled in and actually did pretty good, and you got Kenny Pickett coming back. So from that standpoint, I do think it looks really good. As far as optimism, and as you said, Alan, the recruiting, these are it is a pretty good recruiting class, I guess. But by all these so-called experts rankings, I don't think these sanctions are really going to on these schools really have much of an impact. But we'll see what happens. See if any of these guys can make an impact next year. But it seems like they are, even though it hasn't shown up in the wins and losses, which is the most important, it does seem like they might be building a little bit better in terms of a roster.
Now, for spring practice, looking ahead, what's there to be excited for if it happens? I think it does happen. Actually, to ensure it happens, if I'm Pat Narduzzi, I would encourage all my players in the offseason to get real fat, because if you're clinically obese, you could be part of the Phase B vaccines, Pam. So you want to make sure your players get vaccinated before spring practice, hopefully, ideally, and then get it on and pop it with Kenny Pickett back at QB.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if they see hope on the horizon, if they'd push spring practice back a week or two, or a month or two, and kind of get it in a little bit differently if players do get vaccinated.
Yeah.
It'd be something interesting to watch.
Yeah, I could even see it being, normally it's in March and April, maybe in May or June or something like that. They could
have a mini camp almost. Yeah.
And then, only 1 month off before the the training camp starts. I could see something like that happening. But if they do have this, I'm going to be, there's going to be two areas I'm really looking at. It's this offensive line. Who do we think is going to be the starters there? We talked about it at length last week. You go back and listen to it about how we do think that there is some good talent there, some good young talent. It's going to be interesting to find the right combination. And then to me, this defense is looking, as good as at times as it was next year. I think it could be even better next year. I really do. I think this defensive line is still going to be excellent. I think they're going to be even better this year, particularly up the middle. I think these linebackers are going to be excellent next year. Wendell Davis coming off injury. Servassier Dennis is turning into a star at linebacker. But to me, it's going to come down to these defensive backs, particularly these cornerbacks. Not quite sure who is going to step up and really take the reins there. There were a lot of different guys that played this year, and hopefully Damari Mathis, if he comes back healthy. That would be a huge boost to this team. It's going to be interesting to see in that secondary who can step up. We know how important that is in this defense. But those guys, to see who really takes a hold of that position. There's some excellent recruits coming in. There got some guys that freshmen didn't play much this year. I'm going to be keeping my eye on that secondary in the spring.
The offensive line, you said it there too, though, Vince. I mean, the secondary is exciting with all the recruits you were talking about in the future and what Pat Narduzzi's been able to do with those players since he started this program. But man, do you attribute a lot of the woes on the offense? I mean, didn't the whole strength and conditioning staff leave at the beginning of the year? Didn't they lose everybody?
They lost. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. I mean, maybe that has something to do with some of these offensive line struggles.
So,
well, how much is it that? How much is it coaching?
I mean, that's also something to look at, because the way Whipple calls plays and how those run plays look designed, maybe it's not totally on the strength and conditioning staff's shoulders, but it did seem like Pitt, even with pretty big offensive linemen, went out there and maybe didn't get the push that you would have hoped for. I feel like maybe another year under this program that they implemented in 2020 in its first year, that'll also hopefully go a long way. But man, that was a disappointment. Again, we'd be calling for heads if this wasn't 2020, but I'm not calling for anybody's job in these times right now. So Dave Borbely, Mark Whipple, and the rest of you, you're safe as far as the Hail to Pitt podcast is concerned.
Well, we should point out that there is a report on footballscoop.com about Coach Rob Hartley taking a job at Arkansas State with new coach Butch Jones, presumably a defensive coordinator position. This hasn't been confirmed anywhere else, so we should, as of this live on tape show, we're recording this on Tuesday.
Rob Hartley,
no other information.
To interject real quick, important in recruiting under Pat Narduzzi.
He's the director of recruiting, coordinator of recruiting, head of recruiting.
Yeah.
He taught Pat Narduzzi how to use Zoom. That's probably what he did.
Do you think in the days of these, these socially distanced times that like recruiting, you got to use Zooms instead of meetings. Do you think that, some coaches, they have to like wire money to recruits instead of just handing them, bags?
Listen, I'm a Venmo you, but what you got to do is don't take the Venmo and put it into your bank account. What you need to do is just use the Venmo from the Venmo and pay from Venmo. That way no one will be able to know that we trace the money, and make sure it's set as private. I always do my transactions as private on Venmo.
But in all seriousness, yes, recruiting could take I'm not that it's going to take a huge step back, but this is a guy who's been here with Narduzzi since day one, making a lot of inroads in certain areas. Now, Coach Partridge has done an excellent job, both locally and in Florida. We've seen the impact Coach Beatty has made in the Virginia, DC area. So I'm not that concerned. But I am very interested to see if they do lose Coach Hartley, what they do as far as the restructuring of their coaching staff because as of right now, you have Partridge coaching the defensive line. They have two different secondary coaches. They have Coach Bates, defensive coordinator. He has worked with linebackers in the past. Is it possible that, and this is something I was alluding to on last week's program, could maybe one of those secondary coaches coach the linebackers, or could maybe Coach Bates, in addition to his defensive coordinator responsibilities, coach the linebackers? Maybe they bring in the coach that comes in. Maybe he is an offensive coordinator, and maybe Whipple gets moved to strictly just quarterbacks. This could be an opening for something like that to happen.
So there could be some shuffling of the coaching deck with this footballscoop.com report. And then, of course, eyeballing players and where they go. We already have a handful of players going to the draft. Who do we expect to be the highest Pitt Panther drafted, Pam? Rashad Weaver?
I think so. Yeah, I'm just looking at the names.
Over Patrick Jones.
Yeah, I definitely and over Jalen Twyman. I think Rashad Weaver is going to be the highest. He did really well this year. He's getting a lot of attention. I think I definitely think Rashad Weaver.
Going to be interesting to see players like Twyman, like you mentioned, like guys that sat out the whole year, if they do still get picked higher than like a guy like Weaver who played all season.
Yeah, I think that definitely benefited Weaver. I don't know how much it hurt Twyman, but I think it definitely benefited Weaver.
I'd say right now it seems like it hurt Twyman a lot. You don't really hear, you look at some of these draft boards and mock drafts, and you don't see his name coming up very much at all, as opposed to, this time last year, there were people raving about him.
And we don't know what a combine's going to look like this year. We're not sure.
Well,
I mean, who knows? Hopefully they'll be able to do it.
Well, you would think that they would. This is the NFL. They'll find a way to make
that's
it happen.
That's
I
also
have
like
no doubt about that.
The original bubble event. So I would hope they could pull off a little combine with a couple hundred
I will
players.
say this, that combine is going to be very important for Twine.
Yes, that's what I was alluding to.
He has an opportunity to get himself back on the
combine of all time.
He has an opportunity to get himself back in the first and second round radar, because usually if you have a bad combine, hopefully you have a lot of good film to back that up. And not that Twyman doesn't have good film, but it's just very limited. I guess I will say Weaver's still going to be the highest drafted one. I think it's close between him and Jones, and as of right now, between Paris Ford and Jalen Twyman, I have no idea where those guys are going to go. I think their combines are going to be very important.
And then also there's the names that we're also watching. Those guys are going to the NFL. We're rooting for them. But then you got your DJ Turners, your Phil Campbells, Jimmy Morrissey, Kessman. Expected to leave there, Vince, all those guys?
DJ Turner, I guess, is from last I've seen, he's still on the fence, maybe, but all those other guys are expected to leave, I believe. I think some of those guys are going to get some opportunities, if not in the NFL, maybe in another football.
Jimmy
league.
Morrissey's declared for the draft.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
He was
just wanted to clarify.
A walk on to the NFL, maybe, or maybe to the XFL. I could see Jimmy Morrissey as a great XFL team captain in the future. Hopefully, for
he would
LA
be good
Wildcats.
mic'd up.
Oh, I mean,
he doesn't seem like an LA Wildcats guy.
I mean, playing with Storm Norton, that'd be a great offensive line. But no, I would love to see Paris Ford in the XFL more than any player because he talks the most. Players that we expect to stay. Trey Tipton, who is this like his 9th year of eligibility? He'll be probably sticking around. John Patrician, Lucas Kroll, who I'm most excited to see develop a super friendship with Kenny Pickett and get a lot of targets next year.
Well, one thing I want to you bring up Kroll there. We were talking about coaches if there would be any coaching changes. We talked about, Coach Borbley with the offensive line, how that struggled. Coach Salem with the tight ends.
He's one of 2 remaining original coaches on the roster, him and Andre Powell for the running backs.
Yeah. Narduzzi obviously has a very, tight relationship with him, but at what point do you start looking at the coaching to start expecting, maybe he's got some other responsibilities that I'm not aware of, but you think at some point maybe a coach needs to be held accountable for some of these shortcomings at the tight end position.
Yeah, I don't know what to say here. Is it that this many recruits just can't catch? Or is it something behind the scenes? Maybe they don't practice catching footballs ever at that position for the Pitt Panthers. So Tim Salem, again, I'm not calling for anybody's job. It's 2020. But come on, man. How about some pass catching drills? 3 hours before every game, too. Deontay Johnson style.
Can I read this stat out while we're talking about tight ends? Chris Peak at Panther Lair tweeted this.
I saw this. This is great.
In 2016, Scott Orndorff caught 35 passes for 579 yards and 5 touchdowns. So 35 catches, 579, and 5 touchdowns. That was in 1 year in 2016. In 4 years since then, all of Pitt tight ends have combined for 90 catches, 778 yards. So not too much more than Orndorff's 579 and 3 touchdowns, not counting the one trick play. So that just shows you that there was a big drop off in the past 4 years since Scott Orndorff left.
And the thing is, Scott Orndorff made some big catches.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked
he was a key part of that offense.
Yeah, and that Clemson victory, he had a big one. I believe in the game against Georgia Tech, he had a big catch as well that was critical for a victory. These tight ends, my goodness, just nothing.
It also just tells you how wonderful Scott Orndorff was too. Can't take away from him.
Yeah.
A lot to live up to for these Pitt tight ends, and they just have not since 2016. So we got other players come back. AJ Davis, Damari Mathis off the injury. We'll see how he responds. Of course, we had players this year that have us super excited for their future. Servassier Davis, got to be most of all, Vince, right? I mean, to burst onto the scene, expectations moving forward, all ACC all day.
Yeah, this guy just outstanding from the line. Just in a late ad in the recruiting process, and this guy, you can knock some of these recruiting rankings a lot, but Coach Narduzzi did an excellent job of identifying a guy, and this guy came in and immediately making an impact. Absolutely huge. Also coming back next year, we believe, Alan, your guy, Kayshawn Camp, which would be a huge boost to the interior of the defensive line if he could ever stay healthy and put it all together.
Yeah, that's another one where the injuries have really prevented him from reaching his full potential. But, man, you're going to have some wily veterans coming back to the Pitt Panthers, and either due to the pandemic or just having more eligibility or injury. This is going to be an interesting bunch. I'm going to call next year, it's not going to be like this year unique, but next year is going to be a unique year when it comes to Pitt having a lot of the pieces necessary. It's just going to come down to execution and coaching, which we all scratch our heads about each and every single week. So maybe more of the same, Pam, but I'm pretty optimistic and feeling good as we head into 2021. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm just fed up with 2020.
No, we need some optimism, and I think they've given us some good reason, reloading, Pickett coming back. Let's use the optimism. We all need it. I mean, we'll see if spring practices and, the bad news maybe to follow at some point with some player that we can't see forthcoming. But let's be optimistic as we close out the year here.
Yeah.
All right.
And I was going to just add to what Pam's saying for next year is that, it's going to be a tough schedule next year, if you look ahead to what, assuming that they stay on the same rotation in the ACC that's been planned, and it's not going to be easy, but I think that this team, that there's some pieces there to live up to the challenge.
And there's your football season in review. The season many of us didn't even think would finish. Pitt Football 2020, 6-5, but still optimism at the tail end of this whole thing, even though in reality, if you assess it, they probably underachieved. But I'm finishing off with a smile on my face as a Pitt fan. Can't wait for the return of Kenny Pickett in 2021. And off that high note, let's go over to hoops, where Jeff Capel has COVID, but beat Miami, not coaching tonight against Louisville as of this live on tape podcast recording. Pitt Panthers taking on Louisville in just about an hour. Jeff Capel tests positive, has his team turning around. We wish him the best, but just a week after Coach K and other coaches, himself talking about the dangers of this college basketball season, Pam, this was a rough one to take, hearing about Coach Capel testing positive late last week.
Yeah, he's been very vocal and he said some very powerful things. He's such a great leader of young men, it seems like, a good leader for this program. And it's a shame. Hopefully he continues to stay healthy. The good news is it looks like everyone's been following good protocols because no one else tested positive.
Yeah.
No one else has to sit out. So, it just shows mask wearing and social distancing, even in close environments. I mean, if you do everything you should be doing, good things, the problem can be mitigated. So we hope Coach Capel and his family and everyone who's been around him continues to be negative and everything goes okay.
Yeah, and with Christmas this week, masking up and being around family members, it might be awkward, but you got to do it. We need to have everybody primed and ready. Got a big year in 2021 for Pitt hoops, looking like the direction they're going, and of course football. So please, everybody, stay healthy this week and enjoy some Pitt basketball. Pitt Louisville tonight, Duke coming up in just about a week too, Vince. I'm just enjoying watching Pitt hoops, even if they're going to start losing now that they go into the ACC play. I want to see some competitive basketball, and I feel like we can get it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see this game tonight because they're going up against a team in Louisville, that they've traditionally struggled with. Even great Pitt teams struggled with the Louisville Cardinals, a team that's always going to be having top end talent, and it's going to be interesting to see how Pitt can fare against a team like that. I'm not saying Louisville is one of the top 10 teams in the country this year. Probably not. They got beat pretty bad by Wisconsin. They did beat a Seton Hall team though, so it'll be interesting to see how Pitt fares here. But what you came back to, Alan, I want to ask Pam about this, is that you want to see that continue improvement. This is a team that a few years ago was the worst team in the history of the ACC, some are saying. And
yeah, they said that on the broadcast during the game.
Against Miami. That was really shocking to me. I kind of took offense to that. Jeez.
I don't know how long the ACC has been around, but this was the worst team in the history of it. And, then Coach Capel comes along. They win 3 conference games. Last year, they won 6 conference games. We're hoping this year that they could get a little bit more improvement, that they could get to, a situation where maybe you have like around a 500 record. And if you could get a 500 record in the ACC for a team that's not supposed to be any good, that's a pretty good showing, in my opinion. Pam, so what are you looking for to see this team continuing to do well, continuing to improve?
Just a quick note, the ACC started in 1953 and the ACC basketball tournament started in 1954. So a big history there.
Almost 70 years.
Yeah, I'd like to see
in
this team.
70 years. Jeez.
I'd like to see this team continue to rebound, game in and game out, and continue to have the effort in the rebound and aspect of the game. And if they can continue that, they're going to get more shots. And more importantly, they're going to prevent their opponents from getting extra shots. So I want them to continue that, which they've been able to do. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they go against more talent. I mean, who knows what these teams look like, Louisville, Duke, and how good they actually are. But we do know they have more talent than Pitt does. But Pitt has some pieces. So I want to see what happens in the next few games on the rebounding side of the ball.
My man Hughley, he's a defensive force. They don't want to go near him. He's been all right. He looked pretty good against Miami. I'm so fascinated to see the development of that young player. And, of course, watching Justin Champagny do his thing. We are hopefully witnessing one of the great Pitt basketball players carving out his legacy. Big opportunity against Louisville and to close out the calendar here against Duke coming up too. On the women's side, currently 1-2 in the ACC. Lost to FSU was the last game, but you got a team that's, like you said last week, Pam, just vastly improved from last year.
Yeah, and they didn't shoot too well against Florida State. Florida State's a very good team. In the past, one of the top 3 or 4 in the ACC. We'll see where they finish this year, but very good team, very good challenge. They just had a bad shooting night, but the game just quickly got away from them, and that sometimes happens when you go against a more talented team. They're off until New Year's Eve when they play Boston College, and this might be a game they should be able to win here against Boston College. So I think Lance White will have them ready to play and compete hard against Boston College. Not a way you want to go into a break, but maybe they'll remember that little bit of a beating by Florida State there.
Hoops, the hardwood, is now where all of our attention will focus. We are going to be covering it extensively here on the Hail to Pitt podcast, and we are excited for it. The future doesn't look super bright, but bright enough, and like the theme of this episode, Vince, just some optimism that you could find. If you're looking for it, you're going to find it when it comes to Pitt women's basketball, Pitt men's basketball, Pitt football, 2021. I mean, it's just the dark days. They're going to be over soon, just like that song says.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I'm already looking forward to the football season next year, no doubt about that. And both these basketball teams are getting better. You know, the programs are getting better. Coming into this year, none of us were expecting, an NCAA tournament appearance, but, not that we can't set the building blocks for maybe in 2022 that maybe we'll see some NCAA tournament appearances from these teams.
Let's roll. March Madness. Is it possible? We'll be talking about that coming up in January. But now we got to talk about what people are talking about online. And there's only one thing we're going to hit on this week, and it is just perfect for this week, Christmas week, all the holiday spirit you could handle on the Pitternet.
Can you explain what internet is?
I hear there's rumors on the internets.
And to all those faceless keyboard warriors on Twitter. But we're a good darn football team. I'm proud of these guys.
So for this week, Vince submitted something from Panther Lair in the style of Winter Wonderland, it looks like. And I read this thing, and it looks like a chronicle of Pitt football in song form, but it looks like it's maybe 3 times as long as the actual Winter Wonderland song. And I asked him, do you really want me to read this whole thing on the podcast? That'll be the whole podcast, because this Section 5 person on Panther Lair really carved out a magnum opus here, a chronicling of Pitt football through the years in song form.
Yeah, this person really, put a lot of time and effort into this, and I feel like it needs to be showcased.
So it's a parody song, Pam, and it's got some lines in here. Like, I'll read one line. It's This one makes more sense than the one I highlighted that I'll get to, but here's one. I'll do two. So this one goes in comes Graham, expectations, Tino sacks, interceptions, left land closed down as Fraudy slips down, walking in a winter blunder Graham. So different lines about Pitt football. Some of them are either poorly copied by Vince or just poorly written by Section 5. But you copy pasted, I'm sure, just so we could give this person their due. Great job. I'm not knocking it, but some of it's hard to read. Like this line, as someone who creates Christmas parody songs every year for family Christmas Eve, I mean, you cannot, Pam, ever try to rhyme a word with the word orange. It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's just a faux pas. So here's the line I picked out. It's 2 games left, dreaming orange. Whoops, we're Pitt. Pass the syringe. Goose egged at VT. Crap the bed to BC. 10 straight years in 5+ loss land. Now, they end hard there, Section 5, but you can't say syringe with orange there, but at least they got the point across. Yeah, those were bad times for Pitt back then.
Yeah, they were. I'll give you another one that reminds me of some pretty bad times. Christ is born, our new savior, new regime, same behavior, lost to YSU Pens, wide right at South Bend, winter number 3 in Birmingham. That was horrible.
That's the one I was going to pick.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Horrible. 3 straight years in a nothing bowl game, in just a nothing against Birmingham, Alabama. I'm sure it's a great place, but not a desirable bowl game you want to go to. And then one of the worst parts about that bowl game is it was always played after New Year's Day, and it was a nothing bowl after New Year's Day, one that people completely forgot about. Just absolutely horrible in a time where Coach Wanstead was leaving, and you just didn't know where this team was going to go, and it was
Coach Wanstead on Cameo. I mean, if anybody's looking to get me a Christmas present late, I mean, I would not mind that. Hail the number 2 Pitt podcast at gmail.com if you want to email me that Wani Cameo. Pam, did you see the one I sent you that I found posted on Twitter? He's a good Cameo person. The stash.
I didn't. Yeah, I did not see that one.
Oh, it's gold. Dave Wanstead.
The stash.
Great. Well, let's Section 5. Just want to say you did an awesome job. This is beautiful. I highly encourage everyone on Panther Alert to go read this and sing this to all their Pitt family members over Christmas. Finishing off strong here too, saying pick it back, 5th year senior. Suddenly, grass is greener. Hail to Pitt now, let's go. Time to bust this plateau. 10-win season finally at hand. Hail to Pitt to you, Section 5. Bust-ass Christmas Carol parody. I loved it, and I'm so happy you found that, Vince. Great job on the Pitternet.
Yeah. It's excellent work from Section 5 there. Always good stuff on Panther Alert you could find. But Alan, there's still a lot of optimism and still some skeptical stuff just surrounding 2020 and Kenny Pickett returning.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett returning means a lot of potential changes to the history books for Pitt Panthers lore that some of the old timers I heard around town are not too fond of. I'm back in town, and I was just shoveling all the snow that piled up in front of my house while I was gone in Miami. And my neighbor, while I was out there talking to me from across the street. He said, "You hear Kenny Pickett's back while you were gone? That news make it down there?" And I said, "Yeah, I heard." And he said, "I don't know about that." And then I just kept shoveling. But they're talking about Pickett still just a couple weeks later, Vince.
As they should.
Another Saturday coming, and the Panthers are playing. Time to find out what the answers are saying.
Kenny Pickett's probably going to break all Marino's records in that next year.
Yeah, but they got to put that big asterisk on all them stats,
It's a different game.
Yeah, I mean, if Van Pelt was playing now, he'd be Heisman for sure, more so than Pickett.
Hail to Pitt.
What the Inzers are saying.
So that's what the Inzers are saying. Everybody hyped up that Kenny Pickett coming back and just get this year 2020 behind us, Alan. The college football regular season come to a close this past week. We now know who's going to be in the college football playoff, seeing these final rankings. And I know Pam certainly has a lot to say about it. I'm sure you do as well.
Oh, college football. I can't believe I have a bowl game on in front of me as we're doing this. I'm kind of just was hoping it would all be over and we'd crown Alabama champs, but that apparently is not what's going to happen. They're going to try to play these games, Pam, and I'm not that excited for them at all.
I'm excited for Ohio State to get stomped by Clemson in one of the playoff games. Alabama's going to roll over Notre Dame, and we're going to get Alabama Clemson. I think there was a scenario where some of these games could have been more competitive, looking at the rankings and putting some different teams in there. But a 6-win Ohio State team at number 3 is a bunch of crap from the committee, and this is some of the worst rankings I've seen ever. I mean, this is absolutely horrific, and as to be expected, I was yelling at the TV on Sunday at noon when these came out, and of course they dragged it out. The other rankings they didn't drag out, this one they did, and I was just being drug along the ground to be disappointed.
I'm just bummed that USC totally blew any arguments I would have had for this segment this week, losing that Pac-12 championship game. So I'm kind of just upset at that, but I am happy that, it's going to be a massacre for Notre Dame against Bama. If you think these rankings are horrific, just imagine what they're going to have to experience. They're going into next season. You're going to say Notre Dame's last 2 games, they just were absolutely embarrassed, more so than any other time in school history, except maybe last time they played Alabama in a title game. So that's exciting, I guess, but I like Dabo's been throwing all kinds of the shade, as the cool kids call it, at Ohio State. Well, there's not a lot of tape on them because they've hardly played any games, so I guess, we're going to just go by what we've seen so far.
It's all you could do.
Taking the jabs.
Poor Cincinnati. I don't think, I'm just going to make a case for my poor Cincinnati. I don't think they should have been in the playoff. However, I think they should have been ranked above Florida. I do think they should have been ranked above Oklahoma. I mean, I know it doesn't matter, but for them, it's just terrible. And Ohio State, this is terrible. They've set bad precedents here. It's just going to be awful. I'm so disgusted with what happened. And we get Alabama. We're going to have Alabama Clemson round 4 or 5 at this point in the championship game.
Yeah. You would think.
I'm here for that. I'm here for Lawrence trying to get one from Bama one more time before he goes to the Jaguars, I guess now is where he'll probably end up going.
Yeah.
Yep.
But Cincinnati should be playing in the spring, according to my good, close personal, longtime dear good friend Jones, who Vince and I got to speak with last week. There should be 2 worlds, or maybe 3 different worlds of college football that we experience as fans each year. There should be a spring world. There should be this normal, traditional fall world. A team like Cincinnati should be playing in the spring in like a Serie B. Vince, what do you think?
It's just crazy. I mean, that, they go and they beat a ranked team in a championship game, and they, other teams still, are above them. And I will say this, Florida is a 3-loss team. If Florida, and I think Florida is very good. I think if Florida played Cincinnati, Florida would probably win. But how could you still continue to say a 3-loss team or even a 2-loss Oklahoma team are ahead of Cincinnati, a team that, yes, they did play in this other world, but that world had a lot of ranked teams in it that they beat.
More so than Ohio State.
Yeah, so I don't understand. Like I said, I'm not necessarily advocating for Cincinnati to be in the top 4, but the fact that they were anywhere lower than 6 to me doesn't quite make any sense.
With
Ohio State.
With how little sense this all makes, I'm thinking, I don't know, Pam, did you see that SNL skit where they made it like the Jets news network where they pretended the Jets were undefeated, or the whole thing was just
I saw parts of it, yes.
It's great. All reports that the Jets are basically undefeated and the best team. Maybe we should just turn this whole show into that and just talk about how Pitt is unstoppable, and as far as we're concerned, they're the national champions right now, because that's about how much sense all of these rankings make. Sugar Bowl, I'm calling it the Truvia Bowl, because it's artificial, it's phony, and it shouldn't be happening. Ohio State, I can't wait for them to get blown out against Clemson and get what they deserve. Pam, I'm with you.
Yeah, and I mean, but if you look at Cincinnati's resume against Ohio State's resume, Cincinnati's resume is better. Ohio State hasn't played anyone. I mean, they played Northwestern and Indiana, and both teams, they struggled when they actually played competition. I think the problem here, this year's a weird year, so taking this year out, a lot of these bigger schools, they want Cincinnati and the non-Power 5 to play a better non-conference schedule, but these bigger schools don't want to play these teams because it's a potential for a loss.
Yeah, this was in this weird season. The big teams could not go play. They chose not to play non-conference games, so it's not like Cincinnati even had a chance. So, if I'm Cincinnati. Yeah, I would be so upset that the committee didn't just come out and say that the first week, the first rankings reveal, they should have just said, listen, if you're not in a Power 5 conference, we're just not going to include you because it doesn't matter what you do. And this was a year where a Cincinnati, maybe should have been deserving. I'm not saying I would have put them in over a Notre Dame or an Oklahoma or a Texas A&M, but I think the discussion could have been there. I think they should have been considered. I think Florida's probably, to me, I think Florida's one of the 4 best teams. But they lost 3 games. They don't deserve to make it. That's just how it goes. Ohio State, yeah, they might be one of the 4 best teams, but when you don't really play anybody and you only played 6 games, when other teams are playing, 12 games, twice as many games, and it's just getting out of control.
Resumes are important. Well, they should be. But in a year, maybe it was confusing to the committee. Should we give them the benefit of the doubt? I'm not. What are you doing, football fans? You're probably upset, and you're probably still going to watch anyway, and give them all those ad dollars, and they'll just continue right along. Should I start chanting BCS, Vince? Is that the only way to get the change that's necessary? That you don't want to go backwards. No.
Well, no, I'm not necessarily. I mean, this is a year where, I will say this year, I think the BCS would have been appropriate because then you wouldn't have had to mess around with these non-conference games or these semifinal games that probably don't need to happen because Alabama and Clemson are probably going to win anyway. We shouldn't go that far in that Ohio State is only a 7 or 7.5 point underdog to Clemson, so it wouldn't be that unfathomable. But if Clemson goes out there and just absolutely destroys Ohio State and Alabama does the same, this is a year when the BCS would have been appropriate because it would have just matched the 2 best teams and you wouldn't have to mess around with all this. Should they be the number 4 team or who should have been the number 3 team? It wouldn't have mattered. Some years it makes sense. Some years it doesn't. And I don't know what a computer would have thought about Cincinnati. guess it depends on what kind of computer you're using.
If it's a Mac or if it's a Windows PC where it was manufactured, you got to take all that into account. I just say let them play it out, and let's put a big old fat asterisk on if any team besides Alabama wins, because I think they're the champions. I'm excited to see a wide receiver win the Heisman, and I'm excited for 2020 to finally come to an end. Pam, do we have any more shows left, or are we going to leave it at this for this year?
I think we're going to leave it at this for this year because the basketball teams are pretty much on a break, and we did our football recap. I think this is a good one to end on for the year.
Wipe our hands clean of 2020. I like it. That's a good strategy. So with that said, I mean, what we got left here, Vince? We got college football coming to the close. Pitt. I just saw Steve Ensminger is going to a consultant role at LSU from the offensive coordinator position. Fingers crossed. Hope Whipple does that.
Yeah, there's a lot of coaching changes happening around the country, specifically at LSU. Bo Pelini is no longer going to be there.
Don Brown's out at Michigan.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes that we'll have to monitor. I think we're all in agreement that Alabama and Clemson are going to face off for the championship game. So I guess whenever we return in the new year, we'll be predicting the winner of that. And hopefully we'll have some more Panthers basketball victories to talk about. And we'll see what happens on the coaching front at Pitt. We'll definitely have to have our fingers on the pulse of that situation.
And we will right here on the Hell to Pitt podcast. That's what we do. Pam, you got anything left?
Happy New Year and hail to Pitt. Wear a mask.
Hail to Pitt.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you Pitt football, basketball, sports fans. Thank you for getting through 2020 with us and keep on listening to the show. We appreciate it. We see the numbers, and you're still there, and you're still following Pitt sports. That means you're still alive and healthy and kicking, and that's what we want for you in 2021 for you and yours. So until next year, for Vince, for Pam, I'm Alan. Hail to Pitt, everybody!
Living